everybody. I believe we're on our episode 18 of Around the Bend podcast, and we have the pleasure of having Joe Mitchell here. How are you doing, Joe? Doing good?
Oh,
Sorry, I think we had a
there.
little
Got you.
freeze up there. It's okay.
We did. I got you back.
Yeah, it's kind of hot here today, so maybe our internet connections might come in and out here and there. Um, But yeah, thank you for taking the time out. If you want to give people a little bit of your background, I think it'll help them appreciate, what we're going to talk about a little bit more.
Yeah, certainly. So I've got a long history of small, medium business IT support in the creative advertising world in San Francisco, primarily Northern California. And I have a bit of a creative background myself, coming from Academy of Art University in computer arts and animation visual effects. And so then I've worked with Apple for a few years back around the time the iPad was launched. Apple Retail, it's a big deal at the time. I think I kind of came into Apple Retail looking to be a technician right out of college, sort of a post college job, and got involved with the Apple Store and looking to be a certified technician or genius, as it were, and got into the retail store and sales, and then being trained and training in Cupertino as a certified technician. And that was always the draw of the job, was working on the computers, and so much as sales at the time, but that's what everybody wanted to do. But a lot of that job, almost, I don't know if it's 80% or 60-40, but a lot of it is customer service still, and working with people at the Genius Bar and things like that, and repairing relationships, as they'd put it. So I sort of had my few-year boot camp with them right after the iPhone launched, right into when the iPad was launching. So that was, late 2000, 2000s, I guess, into 2010. And had my sort of customer service IT troubleshooting boot camp and software, and did do a lot of hardware repair. I imagine they don't do much of that anymore. And so spent a lot of time learning about troubleshooting, IT support, and just how important that people relationship was. And it was a really interesting time to be there, frankly. So um, yeah, and then from there moved on to become a consultant in San Francisco proper. And um, the company that I was working for is focused on pretty heavy Mac support, Mac customers at the time, still early, 2010s. And so a lot of these companies did not have full IT teams. They usually farmed out IT, and they generally were more of a creative kind of company. So creative advertising, design, post production, and editing, and things like that. So met a lot of folks, different kind of companies, and it just sort of a small world in the creative world at the time. But it was very much a San Francisco advertising world, and ultimately ended up getting hired by a creative company there in San
Hmm.
Francisco. 11 worked with them for quite a long time after that. Good part of 10 years, and things really. The world got really big by the time I was done after that 10 years. So started very small world, become a very big world. And it was quite an interesting transformation, just seeing San Francisco, and being in college in the early 2000s, downtown at the Academy of Art University. And I think it's time it's Academy of Art College became Academy of Art University. I graduated, and in any case, saw San Francisco go from basically .com. I remember going into college, and they were talking a lot about, hey, yes, the .com bubble burst, but there's still a lot of jobs in this kind of thing. And but seeing it go from basically post .com era into what we just experienced through just pre-COVID, which was you know um, the San Francisco of just impacted tech and one wheels and all the self-driving cars driving around. And then it was now a ghost town basically, and work remote hit and COVID hit. And so it's been an interesting, I guess, 15 or 20 years, like 20 years if you include college. Geez. So
And time does fly like that. Even when I think about, I've been out of high school for a decade, and even I'm like, oh, I'm super young, but I'm like, well, that was a decade ago. Wasn't as recently as I thought it was. And I'm like, oh, well, I just got out of college 3, 4 years ago now. So I'm like, it flies by faster than we want it to, right?
it does. I mean, always looking back and looking forward, it seems like a mountain, but time flies and change is constant. That's for sure. Even just the last few years, what a difference. So
100%. And I think one thing, because a lot of my work that I do is supporting IT teams, supporting IT projects, and I think that's kind of an interesting problem and dilemma you probably faced at 11 that a lot of IT leaders don't face is that you probably started not with an antiquated, because it was probably a good tech stack for when you started, but how do you manage that like constant process of upgrades, which now they call digital transformation, but 10 years ago they probably just called it, I don't know, IT ops or something like that. The name seems to change every 6 months and depends on who I'm talking to.
yeah, that's a great point, and that sort of 10-year run was a long time. I saw a lot of change happen there, and ultimately was through most of that period was as the IT decision maker, and basically taking a company that's was single office, small medium business, everything in house, everything is you buy it, you own it, hardware, your server room, your rack, to basically a cloud, cloud first, or mostly hybrid cloud, but cloud first mentality. And really, SaaS is the other piece of that comes into play, or I would say maybe even SaaS came into play first. And really, with I guess in my situation is not so much an enterprise, although I had some experience as a consultant working along with enterprise IT teams. It's very different when it's you know yourself and a couple people, and you have to scale as needed, I guess, for projects. And then when it comes to cost and support, and just the digital needs of the creative teams, and frankly every employee, it's not just wasn't the digital teams, but everybody from HR to creative is using some kind of unique technology these days. And utilizing SaaS went from something nice or potential cost saving to something that was a requirement for you to be able to scale. And we were spending by the end nearly zero time troubleshooting hardware and systems, and most of the time uh, managing workflows and employee experience, and simplifying and making everything better for everybody as a remote team, because
Mhm.
basically we were all remote by the end. So a lot of the work we did up uh, lift and shifting our hardware and general systems and storage systems to the cloud, really paid off coming into a full remote situation, into COVID.
Mhm.
Basically, this was which was probably for most people that really forced the issue. So
That's definitely true. I mean, how when you say there was like no troubleshooting, like how do you get to that point when you're operating with so many different like endpoints, so many different devices and things like that?
yeah, with the I guess over a period of years and really time of in some systems you invest in or you have, and you just sort of throw it out, I guess. But hardware needs to be replaced every I guess 3 to 5 years. So when it comes time, we held on to systems that were needed, and then when it made sense, we went from sort of a LAN based management system to a WAN based system. So it was better for us, as we had creatives and production folks traveling around the globe for shoots for commercials and things. So how do they stay connected? How does our management stay connected? It was a VPN, but then there's a problem, with VPN troubleshooting, and pushing toward a zero trust WAN based management system for laptops was a big part of that. And laptops were stolen, and left in cabs, who knows what. So there's a security implication there. So pushing us to cloud vendors was a benefit to us. So we were pushing for it as much as we needed it. So as you go to SaaS or managed services for laptop or endpoint management, where we could host it in the cloud, it made sense just to go straight to SaaS because their engineers work on their product all the time. And there's a small group of us, and our primary focus is our employees' experience. And so that was part of it, I guess, is offloading this server backend management to the engineers that work on it all the time. And then obviously you don't need to worry about hardware and in office infrastructure, losing VPN and that sort of thing. But and the other part is, I guess, at least my mentality for our team was let's design um, let's design our systems for resiliency as much as we can. Let's get ahead of the curve. Let's get away from break fix. We don't want to be the fire department. We want to be building things rather than putting out fires. And so, as much as redundancy, resiliency as we could get was probably the other part of that. And over time, I guess you can start to see those efforts come to fruition. And interestingly enough, COVID was probably the time that it was like, well, this is the real test, and um, I think the scale with SaaS or infrastructure as a service that we really started using, cloud infrastructure, hybrid infrastructure as well.
Hmm.
It just allows you to scale in a way where um, it's not zero troubleshooting and it's just more people focused support and where things don't go down outright if you design it right. So, which is a number of things. But, if the power goes out, that's on the building and not us. So I guess we can't be held accountable or something to that nature. But as far as our systems went, and by the end, also everybody has a cell phone in their pocket that gets them mostly what they need uh, with cellular connection or other things. So there was built-in redundancy by the end. So
Hmm. What? So there was like a design to it, like it was done on purpose to make it more frictionless, make it easier for you and the employees. Sounds like.
yeah, because yeah, our lives are better if things aren't breaking just as well as it is for the employees. If something breaks for them and they're dealing with a high stakes client for the bottom line of the business, then that's bad for them. But it's also we're going to catch the blame because something broke, or people are understanding to a point. But the longer we go on with computers and systems, like uh, nobody wants the power to go out or so much the powers, but something to go wrong. And everybody as we go increasingly into video calls and global teams and hiring remote from anywhere, it's even more important for things to work. Everything's a production. It's a Zoom. It's a client meeting. They're presenting work. That was another challenge we had started during COVID. Is how can we present high quality video edits,
Hmm.
re-present them over Zoom and things like that. So that was something we were able to tackle and put together a custom sort of cloud first system for them to present video um, to clients because I guess we had the availability because we weren't, hanging on to a more traditional system. So it allowed for a lot of um, system building that was very proprietary to the needs of our I guess our clients, but our employees at our company. So that was really an interesting time, and that was the fun stuff for us too. We'd like to be challenged to build stuff that is new and not just to be doing the same server or switch management. And I guess to be fair, uh, you still need in-house hardware, but it's at a minimum and it's cloud managed. I guess is where we went with that. So we could, as we had remote offices or a bigger footprint physically, central management or cloud management is the thing. But hardware can still break, and you can only put so many redundant pieces of hardware that are sitting on a shelf. I mean, there's only so much that makes sense to purchase, but um, yeah.
No, I definitely see what you're saying, but there's, I guess, too. like some leaders and some people I've talked to is like they're very hesitant to like let's say move to cloud-based cloud-based solutions or cloud-based like ops because they feel like, oh, maybe I'm going to lose control, or hey, that how can I justify that spend, you know? But there is like a balance too because every organization's different. So like how did you guys decide balancing like budget and like, hey, this is what I have to get done to move towards those like maybe newer or possibly more expensive cloud solutions, or sometimes, I mean, I don't know, was it cheaper? Like how are those decisions made? Because there's a lot of things you have to pull in.
Yeah, it's great. And we talked a little bit about this, I think, earlier when I was kind of thinking, moving sort of like our endpoint management. And we held on, we had great licensing, from like, 2012, and some of those we just held on to because it was a budgetary, you get great licensing. And as I guess the subscription model really takes hold, that's where the vendors win in SaaS, right? They can up the pricing every year on you per seat.
Yeah.
And but you never have to continue to buy,
What? They would
software and
never
things like
do
that.
that,
No,
Joe.
of
What?
course not. Of course they wouldn't. It's a trade off, and as if they're not, and as everybody got to subscription model, we were ultimately forced out a lot of times because it's like, hey, look, we're end of lifing our off the shelf software, and you need to migrate to one of our hosted environments, and it's like, okay, then I guess we'll do it. And, I'm hoping then you will provide us with um, ongoing improvement of your product and the best support you can provide. And, if the server crashes, it's on you. So I guess that's off of us. So it's a trade off. And we did hold on to a lot of our systems individually until we really were liking what we were going to gain. So either because of the architecture was a cloud-based system and out of our, on-prem office, we either were gaining something that we wanted for ourselves or that would help us enough to, scale our team without having
Mhm.
to add another headcount. I mean, that costs money too. So, um, it was either we were jumping on something that we needed to, but to your point, often we waited until either um, that we were sort of forced to, or the licensing, they were coming back with higher quotes, or it made sense to go to the cloud, and that's, by the end, everybody was pretty much there. And it's like, well, let's just go. And then it becomes, you get multiple vendors and who's got the best product, and, lock in is another a piece of that. But really it should be the best, may the best sort of SaaS platform win at that point, I guess, if everybody's gone subscription. So
And that's actually like another problem. It's just like our own personal finances. You get all these subscriptions and these monthly things, and then it's usually starts with one, and then it goes up to four, and then it's like nine, and then 2, 3 years down the line, like a lot of IT departments, they have like a okay, wait a second, like what's going on here? And then they kind of have to reevaluate, especially in this environment, like, hey, what's realistic and what's not? Like, I know one of the guys I know, he's like, they're like, we realize that we're spending on like 56 different SaaS applications, and then we're creating, we already have redundancies, like, because the organization went from like 1,000 to 5,000 employees in like only 6 years. So, like, they had this crazy growth and then it kind of halted. And then they're like, wait a minute, why are we, paying for these SaaS solutions that are super similar? And then which of these should we actually be in housing? you know you like, because nobody had really asked that question, like, hey, why did we ever do a cost benefit analysis of like just creating our own kind of solution to these things? Because they're like a VoIP, what do they do, like call center
okay.
AI and stuff. So they're like, there's not really a ton of softwares that pander directly to what we need anyways. So it's those
I,
are like
it,
some hard questions.
it is. And as everybody was, well, this is, as more and more of just sort of the general employee or user base became, using all of these platforms, especially for full remote, it's there, as the competition grows for every sort of sector. And then we had situations a lot where, like our clients, we're a smaller advertising agency than sometimes a lot of the companies we work for, major enterprise companies or technology companies or major healthcare companies. They have a they have a preference of what communication tool they like to use, for example, or what file sharing tool they like to use. We have our internal file sharing tool that we, probably get with our primary email provider, et cetera. So it makes sense for a cost situation for us to use that suite of tools internally, and hopefully with our clients are using the same one, but often they weren't. And we have smaller client teams that are asked and sort of pushed to use this tool, so we have to buy a set of licenses, but try to keep a lid on that a little bit because we don't want to have basically double or triple dipping on a video solution or a file sharing solution, and it happens. And then you have uh, you know employees coming in that like what they like because that's the world we live in, and everybody is used to using their tool. And their preference of, it was probably laptop at one point, it's Mac to PC or something like that, but now it's, I like this solution for this, I use this project management software, I like this file sharing software, I know how to use it, so I like it. Or they just like it, or that's what the client wants. And so that was a quite a bit of time we did spend, outside of classic IT, is keeping licenses under control. And frankly, I think some of the software vendors started offering freemium. Users can sign up for it, and it creates a security issue, especially for file sharing and for unreleased work. Um, just the nature of the work we were doing in advertising. But it's shadow IT, I guess they would call it, where users are quite capable of going out and signing up for a service. And so that was something to keep, I guess it's kind of, it's SaaS ops or SaaS security ops or something like that. It's shadow IT and keeping all that stuff under control for security and for cost. And so things just sort of evolved into that, and you see a lot of SaaS ops jobs coming up now. And it's like, yeah, there's a lot there, to encapsulate, if it's this type of company. And a lot of companies are nimble enough to really, if you're full remote, you don't have any office, you don't need any, internal Wi-Fi or internet, that kind of thing. But you have your SaaS platforms that everybody uses. Everybody still usually has an endpoint. So how do you manage that and ship that stuff around? And this is getting into COVID. We started seeing this stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
It's last mile internet problems is another thing. The internet's really, it's like, hey, everybody working from home adds another layer to complexity of that in a different way. So it never got easier. It just got different. So
When you say last mile, what does that mean?
so uh, we can control only so much of a user's machine or their platform, but if somebody's presenting to a client from, especially during COVID, because everybody was at home, but we did have eventually, a soft opening for office space again. And but when the internet is provided not by our sort of corporate team and our facility, it's a little bit on that employee to make sure that um, their connection is good or that it's secure and these types of things. So last mile, to wherever they're sitting. So down your internet to your house, or your wherever, the airport or the Starbucks. It's the open internet, and it can be a jungle. So um,
I see. And that's kind of like a hard, that's kind of a hard issue. I mean, do you think it's getting easier now that things are like more hybrid, or do you think that just makes it more complicated?
I think it's just a new. I think it's a new set of issues, and it may depend. And I think it depends on where companies are coming from in the first place. And for our situation at the current role, with a smaller team for a small medium business, maybe it's easier because you're focusing more on endpoints, user experience, and SaaS, and you have that help. You know, Whereas a larger IT team has a real lockdown on their office systems, and everything that they had control, that kind of breaks the mold. For us, it wasn't a bad transition because we were working in a cloud-based, WAN-based system, and working towards zero trust and these types of things, and building in security by design, resiliency by design. But the last mile internet thing is, we have no control over how bad somebody's home Wi-Fi system is, and if that's where they're having to work from, it's like, well, we can't go to we didn't start making house calls. It's also COVID. So, but I mean, I think everybody realizes, and then the companies will say, "Hey, look, you see companies now offering home office stuff, and it's like it's a perk, but it's also required. I mean, you need to be able to at least connect to the internet, with a decent internet connection and home Wi-Fi, and having the peripherals you need. So it's a different set of problems, and it can just be dependent on how your company is set up, I guess.
Hmm. I mean, that is a very good point. I think it's like, I don't know, you would think being a smaller company gives you that advantage, but then, you can't offload like support onto other people. So a lot of it just
Yeah.
ends up becoming on you. But then the flip side of being a big company is like the problem of just managing so much more junk and stuff flying around the network and accesses, even if you have that extra help. It's like, IT is, I would say, an underappreciated field. It's like I keep trying to explain to people, it's like carpentry, like you need them. If they're not there, like nothing's really going to work. It's like having plumbers and carpenters. Like people undervalue them because they're not software engineers or like, AI engineers, but it's like none of that other stuff works if like none of your networks are working and none of your devices are operating and you don't have people supporting that. Because it's funny, but like the funniest thing I've heard is like, oh, well, this person's like a software engineer, so they should, they have to like set up their device and figure it out. I'm like, no, that's actually not how that works, and a lot of times they don't know.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, it's a different profession altogether, and it's like, where, and also where's the company's time and money spent? Is it spent on somebody setting themselves up? And a lot of our focus was, how can we get people set up as quick as possible and as simple as possible, and then we are dealing with shipping delays because we can't just walk in the back and grab people hardware and hand it off, and so there's a lot of that to consider, and I think I guess another point to, is it harder or easier, is it can depend on your workforce and how, like to your point, tech savvy they are, um, and how well, of course, they've set up their home internet or their home peripherals and things. But everybody's at a different level when it comes to technology. I guess younger generations are coming up a little more with technology, but there's some missing parts to that as well. I would say that the abstraction of what it is today for younger generations are more, I guess, comfortable in front of a screen or using a computer. It seems a little bit funny at this point to talk about that, but they don't know quite the underlying systems as well, the basics, rough around the edges, file folder structure. Everything has become a nice GUI. Everything is an app that's nice and simple to use, but there's still an underlying infrastructure that it's been built on top of. And I feel like, a few generations back, we're used to, troubleshooting their Windows computer, for lack of a better example, or, restarting, reinstalling Windows, whatever it was, back when I was a teen, or in my 20s, like, you had to sort of figure it out. It wasn't the phones, the tablets, the computers have gotten quite good, but does that make you better at computers? I'll have to reference an article that came out at one point a few years ago that we were sort of laughing at. It's digital native. You're good at computers, but are you really good at sort of the slightly harder aspects, because you don't have to deal with them anymore? So
Hmm.
it's a different issue. But I guess the point is how how well trained. I mean, user training. How well trained. It's not to put it on just every individual, but how well trained and how savvy is your group. And at some point, it now is the responsibility of of sort of, say sales teams or client teams, hey, get good at Zoom and presenting and hosting meetings and learning the software ins and outs. You probably, as an IT person for a salesperson, you probably should be better at running a big Zoom meeting than I would be, because it's your daily driver basically.
Hmm.
And it shows to a client how you're the host, not the IT person. So
I think that is definitely like a good point. And I think one funny story I heard from, so this guy is like more of like a CTO, senior software engineering manager. He was saying like when he started his career, in the 90s, they'd just hand him a giant book of and then be like, hey, and with a floppy disk, install this software package, set
yep.
up your device, set up your administrative rights. And he's like, I hate doing this, but he's like, literally, no one understood because he is also from the Midwest. He's like, nobody, like, they just looked at it like it was like a magic machine. Like, people just had zero clue what was going on. So they're like, he's like, okay, I had to spend like half a day reading page by page, install this, do that. And now, if it's not instant and it's not done right away, we're like, oh, this is broken. This is bullshit. It sucks. You know,
Yeah, that's the other
uh,
part of it. Yeah.
because I worked at Verizon, so like your story working in the Apple store, like I get the craziest curveballs that clients would come tell me about, and I was basically doing like break fix IT support, like, and I even did that on my own for a while,
Hmm.
like helping people set up like their home networks and things like that. So it's like it's funny. A lot of I couldn't really explain why a lot of stuff was working, but I kind of knew how to make stuff work or make it not work, and I had a really funny memory kind of on this topic where I had a guy, he came in, this is like 2019, like right before COVID, and he brought me an original BlackBerry, like original. And
Okay.
then he's like, I want to buy, and this is 10 minutes before closing too. So you understand working in retail, like where your mental space is 10 minutes before closing, and he's like, I want to buy a brand new iPhone and I want you to transfer everything. And we had a policy that we don't do that because it would just burn up a
Right.
ton of time. And not only that, it was so old. I was like trying to explain to this guy, like, even with Bluetooth, even with all that, I'm like, you can't, sir, it just doesn't work like that. He brought me like a 2005 or 4 Blackberry, and the guy got like crazy angry. He's like, so you just don't want to do your job, huh? And I was like, no, like, I don't think you understand. Like, it just doesn't work. Like, and people, their mentality nowadays is just like, if it's not instant, they have
Yeah.
no understanding or conceptualization really of how these technologies integrate with each other, and they're just like, oh, if it's not instant, then you're just not doing your job.
Right. Or the product is bad. So you think you bring up you ring a couple of things there. One is I was speaking a little bit about generations back and how much of the underbelly do you know? And I would gather when you were being the IT person for friends, family, and setting things up for people because you just could get it done, that you probably didn't have Google, let alone Chat GPT, to go type in, how do I do this? Like everybody can today. And the other part of that is that expectation management still continues to be a challenge. It was a challenge, it's a challenge in retail and product sales and data transfer, which really is a paid service. In Apple, when I was working there, we were providing a lot of value add of providing people, we genuinely want to solve a problem back then, but getting into beyond 15 minutes of time that were, quote, free or came with the product. It's, you know, things take a lot of time, and to do them right, and losing somebody's data is, the worst thing you could do. And but the expectation management, like you're saying, it's can you get this thing into this, and it's like, you're bringing me a product that we never sold or didn't sell you, and it's old. Do we know if it turns on? And learning that skill is tough, and it's really difficult to um, to solve somebody's issue, and when sometimes it's the bearer of bad news. Um, so it still maintains today. That's one of the more difficult things to do.
Well, I think too, having your end clients be engineers, it can also create a what do you call it? It can create a it's like your client is really intelligent, but can be a bit adversarial. Like I remember, I just felt like that role that I was in really helped me understand what like tier one, tier two support technicians go through. Because I also
Hmm.
remember there was another guy. He was like some staff software engineer at DocuSign or something, and he comes in. He's like, "Oh, can't you just redo the firmware on my phone?" And I'm a Verizon employee. I'm like, no, I'm not gonna do that, and that's not what we do.
It's beyond the scope
Yeah.
of what this is today. Yeah. And that's a great point too. And we talk about a lot of what was just some fun memories of retail expectations and just being, standing there in front of the general public and trying to solve IT work. It's like, wow, I'm so thankful for that experience of what I took away from it. But how did I get through it? Or, at least I don't see myself ever wanting to have to experience that again. But dealing with the flip side of that, like you're saying, is you're supporting an engineer who is quite smart and good. Obviously, creates some software or hardware, uh, but the expectations there are, we got a lot of pushback on like, hey, just give me what I want. Give me admin, give me, I, you know, I don't want you controlling my computer. And it's like, well, we're liable for client business and data and things like that. You cannot, part of that is that you don't have full control or you're basically assuming full responsibility for unreleased, contracts here and money that, you don't want to mess up and we're trying to help. But anyway, so there's an expectation management on the flip side. And we had people trying to sort of bypass controls, and they're there for protection of the company, of course, but also to keep the employee not liable for data loss or data breach and things like that. And there's another understanding on the flip side of the lack of technology understanding. It's like, hey, I know what I'm doing. Let me like like, don't like give me the keys to the castle sort of thing. It's an interesting different issue on the same vein.
Yeah, and actually that was one thing we had talked about before where nowadays the line between the cybersecurity, security, IT, whatever you want to call it, is like the line's getting really blurry because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times it's like crossing over. So what would have been like I feel like IT was blended with like security or cybersecurity for a long time. Like a lot of the functions like were combined, and then cybersecurity kind of went off, and you kind of saw it being its own thing. And now I kind of see it like the way that it's being described, and I see on the field like roles coming out. It's like blending back together, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
know whether that's economic or that's just the reality is that there's a higher expectation than there was a couple of years back, but I'm starting to see there's not like dedicated there are cybersecurity analysts, but they're like, they're expecting like an IT ops specialist to also have characteristics of a cybersecurity analyst. Those are some
Yeah.
things you see out there.
I think you probably have a great, view into that as sort of what the different types of companies or industries and different size companies. I think kind of I discussed a little bit about it's like the size of our company. We have so much time and resources, and so how much can we do, and can we build in as much security as possible? I think I mean in general, I think security is always increasingly important, as we know and as we see, and as things are cloud-based, internet-based world. It's a jungle, and it's a lot of people don't quite understand that, and it's an increasing threat. It's everybody's responsibility. So in that sense, yes, I think it's coming back. And it may just be the size of the company or the type of company or the type of data that that is at risk. Uh, that would probably garner the reason or support of chief information security officer or somebody like that to manage that. But the data is out there, and everything is generally crisscrossing the internet or at risk, or um, somebody that's a target is, everybody's information is on LinkedIn, for example, and social engineering as far as like phishing and hacking is a thing. And we saw a lot of that, and people reaching out to people and pretending to be somebody else. And the social engineering thing was one of the bigger things we saw happen, throughout the years, that just never quit, but everybody's responsibility, and it may just depend on the importance. But if you're dealing with client data or people data, especially, we may have been lucky that we didn't have so much in the way of collecting personal information on people and storing it, or reselling it, even worse. But now there's a lot more government laws and security protections against people's personal information. You certainly never want to lose your client information, and so there's a legal aspect to it, and that's just something, I guess, it's not worth risking or taking lightly. And so, yeah, it's everybody's role, right down to the employee or the engineer that wants full control of their laptop. And it's like, it's not that we don't want to trust you, but it doesn't mean things don't happen, and they do happen. And things get stolen, things get lost, people get
Hmm.
hacked and phished, and so there's user training, there's security controls, and building that in, built by design, security by design, least privilege out of the gate is a help to people. It's not a hindrance when it comes to the risk involved. So that's good.
It,
And that's kind of how I see it from where I was coming from. So.
well, I think it's important people kind of understand it from like the behind the scenes because it's like I think one thing that's helped me as I've gotten older kind of like calm down, like when I get some information I don't like, especially like those exactly what you're kind of saying. Like we had something similar where I like using my MacBook, right? And I want to keep using my MacBook. And they said, you have to submit an exemption, give a case for it, da da da. And I was like, oh, that's really annoying. And then I was like, well, now, wait a minute, why is that happening? Because
Mhm.
something bad happened, or it's usually, especially an organization of our size, like something bad happened or multiple bad things happened to lead to that decision. So it's like, I'm going to play the game. I'm going to do what I need to do to get it approved. And if not, I'll survive, using my company Windows that I don't like very much, but, you know, it's whatever.
This is it's something that's every time we had a 30, depend on how many projects we had going with different clients, but we had a rotating freelance staff, and it's we're exchanging and setting people up at a pretty good percentage of our time. Um and everybody, like I was kind of we talked about a little bit earlier, it's like everybody is used to the tools that they know and like, and same with hardware. And who wants to have to lug around two computers for personal, or and bring your own device was a big movement for a while. And it kind of, it just, it may just depend on the business. I was, when I was a consultant, I had worked with some pretty strict companies where we tried to integrate out of personal preference for executives. They, early when the MacBook Air first came out, and they wanted to use the MacBook Air in a very Windows corporate world. And it's like, how can we make that fit their security needs and their requirements? And, this is going a little ways back, 2013, 2014 maybe, but that was interesting to see then, and it just has continued. And the more that became software and SaaS and tools, and everybody has a preference, and there's a cost security implication, and then there's you know we we want to try to get everybody what they want, and there's we can't just buy everybody what they want depending on the company. Maybe they can, but I think that that's maybe the exception. But um, we want to empower the users, and you know satisfy them to use them, to allow them to use what they want and like, and we'll be successful with, honestly. So that's a challenge. And we built quite a few custom solutions, and and a lot of that is good. Having that good intent is important, and I guess if you can show that that's what you're doing, um, and meet them, in the middle, and work with them, then it can be a good thing, but it's a challenge.
Hmm. I think it's definitely like what you said, like trying to find that balance and everything is really important. Just because like sometimes like big company is super inflexible. That's just the reality of how it is because a lot of rules get created from mistakes in the past, and then how do you stay flexible while getting all the business goals kind of in order? Because that was an interesting point that I didn't really think about. And actually, I'm gonna publish it soon, but I had a talk with so my friend, he works at Cisco. He's like a senior analytics engineer, and all he does is they like monitor the scores and the reviews of employees, and that helps the IT department like pre-set up devices. So like they've kind of sucked in all this data, and then the IT department is like, you're in this job, you have this preference,
Hmm.
and for these reasons, we've already kind of pre-programmed what you're going to get out of the gate coming
Interesting.
into Cisco. So it's like a newer idea because they're trying to, do the hardcore analytics of the current employees, what they're using and where it could be improved, and then like generating like an automatic like profile for incoming employees. So I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Made me think about our conversation.
Yeah, that makes hopefully they're. I mean, it's great. I mean, data driven decisions, and and being able to accept feedback is only going to make a success for the employees as well as the IT team, whichever that may be, or however specific or big or small. And then yeah, you're not having to deploy equipment or software or resources to folks, and maybe you're getting it 85% right. Great, less for you to redo. They're happier out of the gate, because everybody probably needs something slightly different. So that's a great. That I'm sure that's going to be a good talk.
Hmm.
Interested to hear.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely feel like we've covered a lot of good stuff. Is there any, like I'm just kind of like drawing a blank. Is there any other kind of topics or things that you wanted to kind of delve into or discuss?
I think that's a pretty good, well-rounded look at I think where we're at, and I think things are things seem to be sort of ever changing as we've gotten into to full remote work, and um, there's a lot of the AI. I kind of wrote up a little press brief, which I don't have it in front of me. Sort of right as we got into COVID, and there was a lot of AI and tooling, but just from where I'm sitting and where I found most value for myself and sort of using a metric for success, it was the everybody's user, as you were saying earlier, IT support is behind the scenes a lot, and I would get that a lot, and it's like, hey, we know you do a lot, we don't ever see it, and it's like, well, especially with remote work and COVID, it's the software and your computer and every little bit of that experience and your interactions with clients, for the most part, outside of meeting in person, is everything is technology, information systems, and technology. It's and providing a great user experience, whatever that is, and the challenges of security and legal and all of the protections. And I mean, that's just where you're at. But if you can provide that experience to employees, and maybe it's seamless and they just don't have to think about it, then it's a win. And it's satisfying, because a lot of
Hmm.
times IT gets a bad rap. So
I mean, yeah, I could definitely see that, but like I said, it is kind of the base of everything. So as much as you may be out there annoying people, Joe, they need you.
it's okay. I try not to, but sometimes you have to.
Yeah.
Uh,
Hey, well, thank you for taking the time out and have a great day, okay?
Thanks, much appreciated.